Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am Tamara Johnson Shealy. Good morning. It is Black History Month. It is Valentine's weekend. Mwah! I love you, everybody. Welcome to the broadcast this morning. It is Saturday, February the 13th. Let me see where my trusty co-host is this morning. Hi,
Hey,
David.
good morning, Ms. Tamara.
It's Valentine's. It's Black History Month. I'm all dressed up for you.
Uh-huh.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing okay.
Good
I'm
morning, everybody.
uh, um,
You got a hot date this weekend?
yeah, yeah. Um, my usual uh, um, social social whirlwind is going to
Well,
take
guess what?
place.
We got a full broadcast this morning. I'm super excited. It is Black History Month. We have been talking about reparations all month long. And you remember this broadcast? I'm gonna bring this into the stream where we had Mr. Richard Winfield on, and we were gonna talk about reparations, but we didn't. So let me play this morning, David. Let me mute
Okay.
you and mute myself.
Don't know anything about him. Okay.
Where you and I differed was on reparations. That's where you and I kind of kept going toe to toe, Richard.
Well, I think the difference is, I'm not against reparations for victims. I don't think descendants deserve reparations. And I also think reparations cannot remove the racial wealth and income gap, that it's the social rights agenda, job guarantee agenda that does that, and does it in a permanent way, not a one-time payment.
I'm going to bring you
back. Discussion.
I know we only have about a few minutes left in this broadcast. I'm going to bring you back, and we're going to talk about reparations specifically in the new year, okay?
Fine.
David?
David, you remember that?
Uh-huh.
That was Mr.
Yeah, this
Winfield, a conversation that we did not have, that I was committed to having and bringing him back this morning. So we have Mr. Richard Winfield in the house. Let's bring him into the broadcast. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? Happy New Year.
Well, we're well beyond that, but thank you.
Yes, yes. And we have Miss Angela Nirvana in the house. Good morning, Angela.
Good morning, one and all. How's everyone?
Good morning. Good morning. So I wanted us to dive into this conversation this morning. I didn't want to, take too much time with David and I, and we want to dive into reparations. Richard and I were candidates in this campaign season. We both ran for the United States Senate to replace Miss Kelly Loeffler. And Richard is a Democrat, ran a strong campaign as I did. And Richard and I kept going toe to toe about reparations. And Richard has an idea of what reparations is and isn't. So I wanted him to come this morning, and I wanted us to have a conversation because I promised I would bring him back. This is a conversation we did not finish last year. So Richard?
Yeah. I think generally speaking, reparations involve compensation to victims whose rights have been violated with the cooperation of the state. And the reparation payments are made by the state. Often they're thought of in terms of international conflicts, war reparations, as took place after World War I, where the Allies demanded significant compensations from the defeated powers for the damage to civilians. In World War II, you had reparations also of that sort, but you also had reparations that included slave reparations. Germany and Austria paid significant amounts of money to ex-Polish slaves who had been put into slavery by the Germans. Of course, they also paid reparations to the survivors of the death camps. In the United States, as we know, there's been one case of reparations payments to the former internees of the concentration camps that were put into place for approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of whom were citizens. Carter in 1980 had a committee set up, somewhat along the lines of Conyers' legislation, to have a committee to study reparations for African Americans, slave descendants, and the like. And Carter had this committee set up, and then 6 years later, they paid out $20,000 each to the victims who were still around. Now, I think it's important to recognize that reparations are compensation due to state-supported infringement of rights of individuals and groups. That is not equivalent to removing systemic racism, which continues even after legal discrimination has been eliminated, thanks to such things as the civil rights legislation, first after the Civil War in this country and with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, then again in the 60s. That, of course, left in place the large wealth and income gaps between Black and white, and of course also between men and women. And the fact that we are the one nation in the world among democracies that requires people basically to gain access to what they need to flourish in society: jobs, education, housing, access to culture, healthcare, and so forth. It depends upon how much money you have. So because of that, the gaps in income and wealth that are a heritage of legal discrimination, those are perpetuated and intensified by our failure to enact a proper social rights agenda. And that social rights agenda nullifies the effect of those inequities in wealth and income in a permanent way, because rights have no expiration date. They don't remove the need for compensation for crimes against people committed by the state. But those are to be measured by the magnitude of the injury and to be given to the victims of that injury. That cannot solve the problem of persisting racial and gender inequities, because it's fundamentally a kind of one-time payment for what happened in the past, for remedying an injury in the past. But if you enforce the social rights agenda, you permanently remove any such inequities from having any role in blocking opportunities. So I think we want to keep that in mind, because a lot of the proposals for reparations present them as if they are to be solutions to systemic racism and to be things that are going to be eliminating the effects of racial and income gaps. And that's not what they're for, and they can't do it either. And we can discuss the details of this. But there is place for reparations. But they're different from what is required, and they're much less than what's required to completely provide genuine equal opportunity for everyone.
Angela, take a moment and introduce yourself before you dive in. You are Angela Nirvana, and you host a broadcast on the Sundays and Fridays,
Yes.
called the Reparationist Perspective.
Yes, formerly known as Friends of ADOS TV. Okay. Let me just start with how the government is on the way to making American descendants of chattel slavery the permanent underclass in the country our ancestors built with their lives. I'm reading this from Sean D. Rochester's The Black Tax, which I did as a part of my Miseducation of ADOCs in America with 3Ks book club series. Because I think a large part of why white people don't buy into reparations being owed to us to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap that was stolen from our people who built slavery, chattel slavery specifically, was the seed for the return on the investment that white people, by and large, and now immigrants, benefit from. We are the reason you guys eat from that table of wealth. We are the legs of that table. So, although some of us may have income, I would venture to say about 60% of us have lost our businesses, which by and large were sole props because affirmative action that was used to make us whole benefits white women, immigrants, LGBTQIA, and whatever crumbs are remaining go to benefit the American descendant of chattel slavery, as has been the history in this country. So let me just run down a list of what Sean D. Rochester calculated, which on the low end comes to about $104 trillion for reparations, for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. And I'm certain, unless you just want to continue on this road of benign neglect, I'm certain that you can impart upon your people the urgency to include us economically, because Black life will never matter in this country until we are. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to transition, Mr. Winfield, to Atlanta and the median incomes of Blacks as compared to whites in the very city where you want our Black vote. And then I'm going to see if you've had a come to Jesus moment to understand why the reparations is necessary for our very existence. We are on the way to becoming fourth-class citizens in the country our ancestors built with their lives, thanks to your people, white folks in government, oppressing us the same way Chavez's boot was on the neck of George Floyd to strangle his life as he cried for his mother and urinated himself. That has been the boot of the feds. The states, yeah, they owe too, but they can't close an over $104 trillion plus racial wealth gap. Owed, okay? They can't close that on a state level. And the government knows this, but they're trying to get that off, which is why everybody fighting for state repair need to let the feds know this is not to erase what you owe. So let me just run down the list and get into it. So slavery, he took a median between researchers. The cost of slavery from 1619 to 1865. Some researchers say on the low end, 24 trillion is owed. Some people say on the high end, 93 trillion is owed. So Sean took a median of 50 trillion for slavery alone. He also took the present value of Black labor in 1860. 22 trillion is the cost of that. Now, this book was published in 2017. So I'll tell you and explain why 104 trillion is on the low end momentarily, because there's a lot that has yet to be factored into his numbers. I'll keep going. The Homestead Act from 1862 to 1935, the one where they took away the 40 acres and a mule and left us penniless to pull ourselves up by our bootless straps, which is still what white folks want us to do, as if we're in a position to. I'm going to show you how. Well, they took this Homestead Act and enriched white immigrants and our white oppressors and our white slave masters in this country and enriched them for a good 95 years with the reparations that were due us. The 40 acres and a mule, you know, the one Johnson took away, that you want to sit up here and say that only the state is liable to us? Let me keep going. Sharecropping, Jim Crow society from 1870 to 1935, 15 trillion. But you want the black vote. 51% of Atlanta is black. That's the vote you want, while you sit up here and say that we are due a one-time payment of $20,000. No, some mayors say we're due a payment of 151 million. And guess what? We'll take installments. It's the debt that is owed. So that's 15 trillion. The great economic expansion from 1935 to 1965, labor cost 4.4 trillion in 2017 dollars. Education, 2 trillion. Housing, 1.75 trillion. Post-civil rights era, 1960 to the present, 6 decades of a persistent black-white employment gap, 3.3 trillion in 2017. Missing intergenerational inheritance, 4 trillion. Continuing cost, $317 billion per year. Now this is 735 billion in recurring costs that is owed to my people. 317 billion per year, current cost of equity value, $20 billion per year, current cost of 350,000 missing black teachers, $30 billion per year, current lost income from black prison population, $80 billion per year, persistent 6-decade black-white employment gap, $72 billion to $93 billion lost in 2005 to foreclosures from discriminatory subprime lending, $94 billion to $123 billion, the cost of workplace discrimination in 1970. Let me tell you what that $104 trillion and $735 billion recurring does not include, before I get to the numbers for how well we're doing in Atlanta, Mr. Winfield, while you want our vote. You see, you guys want to create the problem, weaponize immigration against us to make us fourth-class citizens in the country our ancestors built with their lives, while offering federal jobs guarantee. After I'm done, I want you to explain to me how the federal jobs guarantee that will benefit white women, immigrants, and LGBTQIA, how is that going to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap to make American descendants of chattel slavery American, while you guys are bringing in a floodgate of immigration to make us the permanent underclass in the country our ancestors built with their lives? I want you to run me those numbers. Let me finish and tell you what that number does not include. That number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor medical apartheid against my people, nor the pillaging of Freedmen's Bureau Bank by our government, nor the theft of our intellectual property, nor compound interest from 2017 when the Black tax was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. Now, let me get over here and let you understand what the median income is of the people you claim you want to serve, Mr. Winfield. And then I'm gonna take a breath and let you explain to me how what you're proposing is better suited to close this gap. 32.4%, wait 1 second. The median income for Blacks in Atlanta is $35,048 as compared to white folks' median income, $83,722. I want to understand how you are in a Black city wanting the Black vote and think you're going to remedy all of this with a $20,000 one-time check. And you want to tell me that we aren't the ones being strangled by institutional systemic racism and the weaponization of immigration against my people, that this can be remedied with a $20,000 check and your federal jobs guarantee. I'll take a breath. Thank you.
Yeah, I did not say that reparations for African Americans should amount to $20,000 per person. I was reporting on what the reparation payments were to Japanese Americans. Okay. Now, what I want to suggest is that payments that are made for reparations are usually thought of in terms of evening the gap in wealth. And I think that one thinks of the land distribution of 40 acres and a mule was a reparation, but I don't think it is a reparation. It's rather an attempt to fulfill the fundamental human right to livelihood. And it was done at a time when in the South, a largely agrarian society with very little free labor, it seemed that the only way to have people be able to sustain themselves was as independent agricultural producers, because the government was not yet taking initiatives to put people to work at fair wages as the foundation of economic security and opportunity. Now, Sherman, as you know, he wanted to do this for 5 million acres, only 400,000 acres, and 40,000 people benefited, and that was taken away later. But one has to recognize that there's a way of thinking about remedying social injustice that takes the view that everyone should have a stakehold, everyone should have a capital, that everyone, in other words, can be an entrepreneur. But the market does not allow that. The market does not allow small business to be the core of an economy. It doesn't let everyone be an entrepreneur. Businesses have to grow and consolidate, and as a result, the fundamental relationship in any civil society is one between employees and employers. And of course, if you're one of those who has enough capital to try to set up a business or act as a landlord, if you lose it, you're left with what happens after the abolition of slavery. You have your labor power, but you may not have a job. And that's why guaranteed jobs at fair wages are the very anchor of economic independence. If 40 acres and a mule had been given to every former slave family, that would not be a remedy to achieving social equity. You probably know William Darity wrote a recent book defending a concrete plan for reparations from here to equality. And he says in that book, well, if we had actually given 40 acres and a mule to every former slave family, we wouldn't need reparations. But first of all, that's not a reparation payment. It's not calculated with regard to the harm that was inflicted upon slaves. It's rather presented as a way of allowing people to have a livelihood. But today, 1.7% of breadwinners earn a living from agriculture. That means 98% of those who might have been given land to make a go as an independent farmer would not be able to sustain themselves. Now, you have similar ideas in terms of how, we're going to solve the problem of opportunity by giving people a payment that will eliminate the gap in wealth. But getting a payment is not going to allow you to sustain yourself in a permanent way. And if you think about the figures that are given by most people, Darity, for example, refers to a variety, and I should say Darity and Mullen, refer to a variety of different calculations. Some are based on how much 40 acres and a mule would be worth today. Some are based on calculations of what the labor of slaves was worth, and then you do compound interest on it all. The figures come up to something similar to what the wealth gap is, about $300,000 per person. Or about, the wealth gap of an African-American family is about close to 900,000, 800,000 plus. Well, giving people a one-time payment is not going to provide ongoing equal opportunity. We know right now what can happen if you get sick, what medical costs are like. You know how much it costs to go to college. You know how much it costs to buy decent housing. And if there is any persistence in unemployment or low wages, there is a gap which is equivalent to that income, that wealth gap. The income gap over a lifetime of an African American is going to be close to $800,000. The income gap for a woman in general in our society is over $400,000 over a lifetime. So the real solution to eliminating how history puts boots on the necks of African American and other groups, and in general on people who have ended up with less wealth than other, is to fulfill the social rights that our Constitution has ignored from the outset. That's not to say we don't give reparation payments to those who are victims, and there are plenty of victims, millions of victims of Jim Crow and the like, millions of victims of unpaid labor in our prison system, millions of victims of housing discrimination and the like. But the payments that would remedy that are not equivalent to securing equal opportunity for everyone. Now, a federal job guarantee is part of the package. You wipe out the disproportionate unemployment and poverty income of African Americans by wiping out unemployment and poverty income for everyone, which is what everyone deserves. Because a federal job guarantee will offer employment at a fair wage, and a fair wage should start at least at $20 an hour, not $15 an hour, and be adjusted upwards as our economy becomes more productive and adjusted for inflation. That's part of it. The other part is having health care available to all, where you don't have to pay for it. And you can do this through Medicare for all. You do the same thing with education. You know, many of the proposals for reparations, and Tamara, I think your proposal included this, speak about ensuring that historical Black colleges and their students be provided with the resources they need so they can go. But, you know, first of all, recognize that today, the vast majority of African American college students are not going to historical Black colleges. Georgia State, for example, has over 50,000 students. Most of them are African American. What we need to do is what has been done in other countries. You shouldn't have to pay anything for education at any level, and you should be given stipends to cover your living costs, which is done in other democracies. We give people health care. They don't have to pay for it. We give them access to education at all levels. We guarantee decent housing, no matter how much money we have. We guarantee legal care, so you don't have to pay for a lawyer, not only in criminal cases, but in civil cases, so you can fight against discrimination. You provide access to culture. In all these ways, what happens is you nullify the impact of any inequalities in wealth and income, and you create a society which on a permanent basis is eliminating the systemic racism, the systemic sexism, and the systemic inequality in wealth and power between employee and employer. Richard, and that is the genuine remedy. And that is not anything that any of the candidates you elected, when I say you, I mean the people of Georgia, have stood up for. It's a different agenda. It's the agenda, by the way, that Roosevelt proposed in '44 and that Martin Luther King adopted when he entered his last struggle for a poor people's campaign. And it's what Coretta Scott King then put before the public 6 years after Martin Luther King's assassination.
Richard, let me stop you right there. Let me bring some other, because there's a lot of people want to chime in. The chat's going crazy. So let me bring in, we have Be the Power. I'm gonna bring in some of the brothers from Be the Power, which is an advocacy. Let me, good morning, Logic. Good morning, are you with me?
I'm with you, Sister Peace. How you doing?
Good morning, let me bring in Grim. Good morning, Grim, are you with me?
Peace and blessings, I'm with you.
Good morning, good morning. Let me bring in Brother Ali. Brother Ali, are you with me? Good morning.
I'm with you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning. These are the brothers from Be the Power, which is, you know, we've been fighting across this nation for reparations. And I wanted to bring these brothers on to chime in to the discussion. So go ahead, Logic and Grim and Ali, y'all jump right on in.
I'm gonna go last. I want Grim kick it off, and then Ali, and then I'll come in a minute.
Okay, I'm gonna mute everybody else. Mute your mics, everybody else, please.
Sure. Okay.
Peace and blessings, everybody. I just want to say this, and I was listening to the gentleman talk, and I don't know if anyone else picked up on it, but I just want to address basically what I see as the underlying theme of what he's talking about. And basically what he is saying that reparations won't do is cure all the ills or the racial ills in society, if I'm interpreting what he's saying correctly. And that is basically like a deterrent to the fact of reparations. Reparations are not owed only to cure the ills in a racist society. Reparations is not only about closing the racial wealth gap, where that's one of the things. Reparations is just what it means, just what it says. It's a repair. You understand what I'm saying? And to repair something means that you have not only the children of chattel slavery, but 3 and 4 generations beyond those people who are actually injured by a certain act. And that act is the act of putting our ancestors in slavery. And that's what I believe that the gentleman is addressing. And one of the other misconceptions is that class-based policies will heal that. You understand? That is not an accurate assessment. We have to deal with ideas and ideals in people in society to actually kill the racism, but we have to be repaired. And reparations have to be a comprehensive program of actually healing and curing these actual ideas that descend from slavery. And we talked on our show last night on Be the Power that it's specific things from the 1870s that actually affecting what's going on in 2021, from there all the way to the storming of the Capitol. And that reparations will make these things whole. We're dealing, what you don't understand, sir, is that we are dealing with the broken people who have not had the opportunities that you had to get higher education and career opportunities, even though you may be liberal. And with that, I have to add the fact about racism. Not saying that you're a racist, sir, but racism has its ideas on both the left and the right. But it's particularly effective on the left because basically what the left do and what the Democratic Party has done is basically took a numb stance to the pain of that. So that is why an individual like yourself is able to argue about certain points of racism. But in closing, I'm going to say it's not about just the racial ills in society, because people are going to do unjust things whether they pay us or not. But basically what has, just like you go into a court of law, you're injured by someone and you basically receive your justice in the claims of a court of law. The same thing here, because what failed in the 1870s was compounded by Jim Crow and the evils of the civil rights era, and even in the crack era. All of these ideas from the moderate white society have aided and assisted in the degradation of Black or African American society, particularly the people that are descendants of slavery. And I just want to read one quote real quick from Dr. King. And Dr. King said in 1963 from his letter from Birmingham jail about these individuals that appear to be our friends in the form of liberals or in the form of moderates, right? Dr. King said, I've almost reached a regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in the strides toward freedom is not the white Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice.
Wow. Let me respond. First of all, I agree with what you're saying about reparations. It's something different than remedying racial as well as gender and other forms of barriers to opportunity. It's something different, and it's something that is deserved in its own right, okay, to begin with. The liberal view is that we can overcome racial inequity by simply enforcing civil rights laws which have removed legal discrimination and throw in a dose of affirmative action, and maybe we can add reparations. But what they do not at all look at is any part of the social rights agenda that I just put before you, which was the agenda of the Poor People's Campaign. And that recognizes that even the enforcement of the civil rights laws does not deal with social and economic opportunity. And that requires that we wipe out unemployment and poverty income, that we cease to allow health care, access to education, access to decent housing, access to legal representation to be conditioned by how much income or wealth you have. When you do that, we are in a new arena. And when you look at these as rights, they don't have an expiration date. You're not done dealing with them when you've made a payment of compensation. The compensation is due. But I think one important thing to keep in mind is a point that Bayard Rustin made, and I think Martin Luther King also shared. I mean, Rustin was his mentor. And that is the idea that you violate the most basic principle of ethics if you allow people to receive benefits or be bound by burdens owing not to what they're responsible for, but things given independently of their freedom and responsibility. That is why it is victims, not ancestors of victims, who deserve compensation. All of us deserve to have any blockages of opportunity we suffer from. These should be remedied. And that refers to anyone. It doesn't matter where you come from, what has happened to you, or your parents, or your grandparents, or your great-grandparents. What matters is the infringement of your rights right now. Now, that's different from reparations, but that's a burden we need to face, and we have failed to address these social rights. They're not on the political agenda of liberals. They're not on the political agenda of Republicans either. And when you speak about the persistence of racism, recognize that right now, we are in the midst of dealing with an attempted coup d'etat of a political party that has become an accessory and an apologist for a fascist movement that wants to make America a white Christian homeland, not a democracy. We can't legislate the attitudes of people, but we can stop them from being able to act.
Richard, because we only have an hour in our broadcast, so let me let Brother Ali chime in, and then we're going to bring in Brother Logic to chime in as well.
Yes, I think what the gentleman is speaking to are basically the social issues that you see occurring in this country, and that's fine. We have to address those things. But what tends to happen with our particular tribe of people, our particular ethnic group, is the things that were done specifically to us have been ignored. And what many in white America would love to do or prefer to do is to continue to ignore what happened and how that stuff has generationally been passed down through our different family members. So you will make the argument that we weren't enslaved. Maybe our ancestors were, because this is what I hear you saying. Our ancestors were enslaved. We weren't the actual slaves. So therefore, you're not really owed anything for that. Perhaps some of the things that happened during Jim Crow, or perhaps some of the things that happened afterward, whether it be redlining, whether it be racial gerrymandering, whether it be the targeting of private institutions like banking institutions that caused many of our people to lose millions of dollars in wealth through being targeted with subprime loans, or whatever the case is. This is what I hear you saying. But at the end of the day, what happens is we had the Freedmen's Bureau, right? The federal government already knew that there were certain things that were supposed to be done, that they should have done. They started to work on those things, And those things were deliberately undermined. Frederick Douglass said something very interesting. He said, our people were emancipated from slavery, were emancipated into poverty and homelessness. That kind of stuff sticks with you. That is generational. And not only was that the case, then you were targeted with racial housing covenants and all kinds of things. We were targeted by crack. We were targeted by all kinds of things. And so what happens with it is the fact that our people have never stopped being targeted by white supremacists in this country. And this government that we pay taxes to, just like everybody else, has a right to deal with that. They have an obligation to deal with that. And we have the right to petition the government for redress of those specific grievances, regardless of how it makes people feel. So, that's what I would say about it in terms of, responding directly to what you were saying. We may not be the actual slaves, but what happened to those people was passed down through generations. And I think that's one of the reasons why Dr. Darity approaches it from the economic perspective, and not necessarily all of the things that happen, like the raping of the slaves and all of these other things. He approaches it from the economic perspective because that's the thing that can be quantified from the time of slavery till this point. Through the racial targeting that occurred, it affects our families through generations economically, and it never stopped. So that's what I would say. You still have to address the problem.
Let me just answer very briefly. When you think of the social rights agenda, it is going to ensure everyone access to everything you need to exercise your freedoms at all levels. It's going to disproportionately benefit those who have been most oppressed. For example, when you wipe out unemployment and poverty income with a federal job guarantee, those groups that will gain the most will be those who have suffered greater unemployment and greater poverty income. Likewise, when we have a proper healthcare system, a single payer system where you don't pay anything and all your health needs are covered, those who will benefit the most are those communities who have been consistently deprived of equal access to healthcare. Likewise, with recognizing the right to education at all levels, what group will benefit the most? Those that have been most exploited. Likewise, with assuring decent housing, and likewise assuring access to legal representation in criminal and civil cases, where you go to any lawyer you want, and the fees are handled like they would be in a single payer healthcare system. Those who benefit the most are those who have been most oppressed. And I think you have to take that into account when you think about the actual enforcement of social rights. They deal with exactly what you're talking about.
Think about
this. It's not either or, it's both and.
I agree.
It's not either or, it's both and.
But that's what I was going to say. But think about how the PPP, let's use PPP aid as an example, right? And use the logic that you're raising right now, that basically the rising tide lifts all boats, right? If we were going to benefit the most from that kind of approach, don't you think blacks would have benefited the most, even though they were hit the hardest by COVID, the damages from COVID? But I'm just saying, the PPP aid that came, right? Shouldn't that have benefited us the most, being that we were hit the hardest by COVID?
Exactly.
But it did not.
Well, it wasn't given to everyone, right? It wasn't afforded to everyone, nor was healthcare afforded to everyone, nor were people relieved of poverty, which is a health.
But it was supposed to be. What I'm saying is, it was supposed to be accessible to the people who needed it. The problem is, it really wasn't. In practice, it wasn't. Theoretically, it was supposed to be.
Well, that's true of healthcare in general. That's true of relief from poverty. That's true to have decent housing, access to education, quality education at all levels.
No, right? We just need our checks because the checks would enable us to do for ourselves. We did more with less when we built over 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated by your people, by the government, allowing white folks to come through and decimate and terrorize us out of business. So
your check is not going to be enough if you don't have the guaranteed income.
It's not just a check.
If you don't have free health care.
The Jewish Holocaust was not repaired with just one check. If it took you over 400 years to drive us into the anchor of this country, it's going to take you about 800 to bring us out. So I'm not talking about a single check. I'm talking about reparations in the trillions over multi-generations. And while you sit up here and say that's not a solution, many of us would greatly benefit from that because we wouldn't have to rely on the tenets of institutional systemic racism to continue to be the oppressive boot on our necks, to deny us opportunities to do for ourselves. We've been doing for ourselves, and we're at George Floyd 846. So all of what you're talking about are programs that you guys like to give with the left hand and take with the right. It's called pandering for the Black vote. As we see, the current government has not even addressed this. They want to give us symbolism like Kamala Harris.
None of
They
the
want to
candidates.
give us symbolism like Barack Obama. They want to give us symbolism like putting Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill on the very money that was used to trade us into slavery. So I'm trying to tell you that all of what you're talking, we've heard it before.
You haven't heard it
And
before.
we are at George Floyd 846. Oh, yeah.
You didn't hear it. You didn't hear it from Raphael Warnock.
Let me tell you something.
You didn't hear
Biden
it
said
from any of our
you had our
representatives in
backs.
Congress.
87% of your electorate came out to vote. And I see him on day one giving transgenders an executive order to compete with us in girls' sports. I don't see anything on the recent American Rescue Plan, which I covered on my show last night. Kamala Harris sits up in a Black Chamber of Commerce to speak to Black business owners about the decimation of Black businesses and how we need to pass the American Rescue Plan. It's nothing more than a COVID plan to fix everything but American ADOC's business, Black businesses. Nothing is in there to repair and make our businesses whole. So I'm just telling you that you want the Black vote, you got to do better than this.
What I'm
Brother
so
Logic.
rights agenda.
Richard.
Okay, sorry.
Let's give brother Logic, because I want to make sure all voices are heard. Brother Logic, you want to jump in there? Can you hear us? Unmute yourself, Brother Logic. Can you hear us?
Can you all hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Yes.
Okay, so I can't hear y'all. So I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say, right? And just give me a thumbs up if it comes through clear. I just want to say this, right? I think the gentleman is using reparations as a subject or a launching pad for his class-based initiatives, right? He said he agrees with reparations. So I don't understand what we're debating. He wants to talk about class-based policies and giving a lot of stuff to a lot of people. But the problem is the damage that we have suffered in this country as a specific group of people have not come from injuries that have been given to everyone. It's become from specific injuries that have been given to us and inflicted on our family members specifically, right? So race-based policies have hurt us. So if you're for these class-based policies, that's fine. But it's going to take race-specific policies to fix what race-specific policies did. So to undo that, you're going to have some racial target policies for our specific group because we were targeted racially. You understand? So when we see that, not only we have to look at Andrew Johnson. We talk about culpable parties. Andrew Johnson put in with his provisional governors who were the former rebels and Confederates, put them back into the offices and power that they had prior to the rebellion and the insurrection and the whole entire warfare that destroyed the country, put them right back into office. That is the United States federal government's role in the harm, putting the same criminals back into power. The provisional governors put the same people who were the slave masters right back in state office. And then we got a history of legislation of black codes and all these different things. And we can go on a long laundry list of stuff that was policy specifically charged at the freedmen and their descendants, the emancipated persons from chattel slavery. It was specific, right? So I don't want to hear nothing about no general approach to the problem. And what I'm talking about is something that happened specifically to me and my family. So you can eliminate college debt. Good. I got some I need to get rid of. And you can eliminate all these things. That's good. But I need to talk about the specific harm
that happened to my family, sundown laws in certain towns, this is government sanctioned murder. You can read a book called White Too Long, get a book called The Bloody Shirt. They talk about how our people was lynched legally, sanctioned by the government. You understand? Now you can't pay for that crime and that suffering. There's no monetary value that you can put on it to really give an exact number on that worth. But what you can do is yield to the demands of the people and give us what we tell you that we want. You understand? So the government doesn't have any constraints financially to fund any reparations program or project. It's not based on taxation or anything of the like. The federal government has monetary sovereignty, and they could do this thing, and they could create a solvent program that can last as long as it needs to last to bring repair to the problems. What we're talking about is repair for the Freedmen's Bank being pillaged and destroyed. And what we're talking about is repair for Reconstruction not failing, but being overthrown with government agents like Andrew Jackson and his provisional governors, like Provisional Governor Perry in South Carolina, when his first on his inauguration speech, and his first action was to put the former Confederates back in the state office, and he made a speech in his inauguration saying that the black man will never be the equal to the white man in this country, and we'll never have Negroes equal to the white. He said that in an inauguration speech. We're talking about government sanctioned domestic terrorism. You understand? The federal government is involved because the federal government promised us equal protection under the law, and they did not give us that. Instead, they pulled the troops out too early, too prematurely, and they knew the violent nature of the South. You understand? So what we're talking about is repair for damage, murder. We're talking about government sanctioned crime where the sheriff was a part of it. The federal government didn't play a role in executing justice when they knew the mayors and the sheriffs, and people came from all across town to join into lynchings where they burnt the black bodies, cut the appendages off, and auctioned them off. You understand? They did it in the church house. They did it at the state house. They did it everywhere that you could do it at, and they came from all around the country. So this wasn't happening for the poor white man across the street or the Mexican that just came across the border. I don't want to hear nothing about no class-based policies when you still ain't fixed the people that built America, and that the government worked in concert with these domestic terrorists to break them with federal policy. So until you fulfill the things that were supposed to be done in House Resolution 613 and the policies that are similar to that, until you go ahead and the government does what it knew and recognized that it needed to be done. So no, 40 acres and a mule was not reparations, but the destruction and the theft of the 40 acres and a mule caused reparations to be needed because that was damage. The government set up projects and programs saying that this is how we can transition these emancipated persons into American life, right? And those things were destroyed through the hatred of white supremacy and domestic terrorism. That is the crime we're talking about. You understand? So through those things, and we had to live through that horror story for decades and decades and decades with continuous, perpetual attacks on our specific group. You understand? So there is you can't come talk to me when it was my mom who had to sit in the back of the bus and couldn't drink clean water out of the faucet and couldn't use the bathroom in the same office that she worked in, right? And we say, do everything for everybody. You can't tell me after not having representation, there was a whole Revolutionary War. One of the founding principles that caused it was taxation without representation. We've been paying taxes in this country since emancipation. Ain't had no proper representation. You understand? Where's the liberty? Y'all fought a whole war talking about give me liberty or give me death. We had to walk. We had to get out of town by sundown. We couldn't even go to the restrooms that our taxes and the local governments was helping to keep the businesses operating. You understand? So we had to pay the same amount of taxes that every other person had to pay, but we didn't get the same amount of representation. That's a crime against America. Yes, that's a crime against humanity. You understand? So America talks about doing everything for everybody, but it doesn't want to talk about healing the damage it did to a specific group of people that it's been perpetually doing, and it owes us the most because we've put the most value in America than any other group, including the Pilgrims, the forefathers, George Washington, and all of them. They didn't put half of the worth into America that my ancestors put in here. So as a descendant of freedmen, I'm talking about reparations for freedmen and the descendants of freedmen, because it was a concentrated effort to destroy us and lock us out of American life. That's a specific part of history that happened with a specific people. So you can do class-based policies and everything for everybody if you want, but that's not what we're here to talk about. And you can't use this historical crime as a launching pad to do Bernie Sanders politics, to do everybody gets everything politics. I don't want to hear everybody gets everything, because this is about reparations. We talking about repair for concentrated government destruction on my family. And you want to talk about everything for everybody. Reparations is not, and I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna leave. Reparations is not going to cure white supremacy, because that's something else, right? Something else. That reparations is to repair the damage that was caused, not to cure white supremacy. We're not disillusioned on that. We know that it's going to take other social reforms and other means to get to the next way. But for us to even compete in a capitalistic society that we've been locked out for so long, we're going to have to get the repair that can even put us in a position to do the type of social justice reforms and put us in a position to do the type of economic reforms that it takes to even compete. You understand? So until reparations is done, we can't even halfway compete in American life. And I'm going to close out with that. Peace.
Right, and I would just like to add to what Logic said, that, and I would like to really, for the gentleman to consider this. I'll take a personal example, and I'll be done. My great grandfather was a sharecropper. You understand? He was a sharecropper, and I today, an educated Black man, or educated freedman, descendant of slaves, I am directly affected. I can't say, well, that was just my great grandfather, I'm fine now. In my personal life, in my personal advancements, my personal movements in society, my literal community that I lived in for generations are personally affected today by what happened to my great-great-grandfather. You know, do you understand that? It's no separation between those things. Those deficiencies were passed down. Brown versus the Board of Education. You know, the little girl with the black doll, looking at whether to choose which doll is more beautiful, the white doll or the black doll. This is all related to reparations, because we as a people need to be healed. The so-called Gorilla Glue girl who put Gorilla Glue in her hair, all of those, that's trauma, sir. Those things are trauma, because we are basically made to be inferior in thinking. That affects our relationships with each other, that affects the crime rate, that affects the murder rate. A check, yes, but all of those things need to be fixed by a comprehensive reparations plan.
And this is why I say that reparations is not just for slavery. It's for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued, ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. And class-based policies don't fix race, and lineage matters.
I'm not talking about, by the way, a class-based platform. I'm talking about rights that apply to everyone. I'm not talking about privileging the proletariat in any way, but I'm recognizing that markets privilege employers unless we even the playing field. And if you ask yourself, why does history continue to put its boot on your necks, despite the civil rights triumphs, which are not illusory? It's because none of the social rights have been recognized yet by our nation and fulfilled. And if you ask yourself how that boot is going to be taken off your necks and anyone else's necks, it requires not money being thrown at you, but the opportunity to exercise your freedom at all levels with regard to all the factors you need, including work, the ability to have employee rights and co-determination in enterprises, access to medical care, housing, education, legal care, etc. That's what removes the boot of history off of everyone's necks and provides actual opportunity and gets us free of the perpetuation of racial injustice. Without it, it can't be done. But reparations are still needed to those who are victims of Jim Crow, of all the things involving
You're
discriminatory
talking
policies.
to the victims. We are the victims.
Some of you are. Some of you are. I think you're old
All
enough.
of us
All
are.
of us are.
We are all victims of not having our social rights recognized and fulfilled.
Not all of you built the wealth
Everyone,
that you now eat
everyone,
from. Give up your
everyone,
wealth. Give up
everyone
your wealth
faces
since money
unemployment.
doesn't matter. Give up your wealth since money doesn't matter.
Money does matter. It matters so long as we don't guarantee people employment when they're able to work and replacement income when they can't, and access to all the other things you need. But that's what we have to
what job
transform.
do Black
And if
folks
you
have
don't
that
do
will
that,
close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap? What
this is what
federal job
eliminates it.
guarantee will close this egregious racial wealth gap? You have yet to explain how that will cure us and make us American.
If you
You've yet
include
to
it,
explain that.
if you add to it all the other aspects of the fulfillment of our social rights, they nullify how differences in wealth and income restrict your opportunities. They eliminate that once and for all. And that's what it achieves in a permanent,
Let me explain
ongoing
something real
way.
quick. Let me explain something real quick. We are 44% of the degree down here in Southern California. Our median income is $53,500. To Hispanics, 17% degreed here in Southern California, their median income is $50,000. They did not build the wealth in this country that they and white folks eat from. We are 6% of the private sector. And you're telling me that a federal jobs guarantee is going to get us up off the bottom as the bottom caste in the country our ancestors built with their lives. A job is going to do that. A degree which drives us into debt that Bernie Sanders and his ilk want to remedy with erasing student loan debt, that only 18% of us are degreed. You see, class-based policies lifts all the groups. And we're still where? On the bottom as the anchor in this country for the sake of capitalism.
Because those
that is what you are
policies have not been
continuing
fulfilled,
to
and you're ignoring
perpetuate while asking for our vote. Miss me with it.
You are ignoring these measures, which are the cause of the perpetuation and deepening of racial and gender inequality. And you have a choice. You can be part of the solution or part of the perpetuation of
Or
these
I
problems.
can put the knee on the neck of the politicians because they respond to pressure and not applause. That's my square.
Sister Tamara, may I ask the gentleman a question?
Yes, we're gonna, yes, sir. We're gonna give this about 5 more minutes because I do want to give Robbie and David some parting words. I don't know if we've been able to get through to Mr. Winfield or not, but yes, sir. Go ahead, Grim. Give us another 30 seconds.
Yes,
please.
sir. I would like for you to explain what do you mean by some of us are affected by the institution of chattel slavery, because you say I take exception of it, but I would like to exception to it, but I would like for you to explain that.
Unmute yourself, Richard. You're muted.
All of our population who are descendants from slaves and grew up and whose successive ancestors did not have a successful Reconstruction, but were oppressed by a further wave of white supremacist terror and were only partially liberated by the civil rights movement, are still burdened by income and wealth deficits, deficits in education, deficits in health, deficits in housing, that all have to do with those oppressions. But the fact that they persist is due to our failure to recognize and fulfill the social rights to a job at fair wages, to decent housing, to education, to healthcare, to legal representation, to evening the playing field between employee and employer. That is where systematic racism lies, not in racist attitudes, but in the failure to recognize and extend rights that are not guaranteed by our Constitution, that were not the object of the civil rights movement. They are rights that we haven't attended to. And the United States is behind most other nations in failing to deal with these fundamental rights. And that's why these inequities remain in place despite the advances of the civil rights movement, despite affirmative action, and they'll remain also despite reparation payments, which are due if they're handled correctly. So I'm not speaking of something that's mutually exclusive, but I'm speaking about something that must not be ignored.
That's not an answer to the question, sir. Respectfully, that's not an answer to a question. You said some of us are, but then you went to answer by talking about systemic racism. By saying some of us are means that there are some descendants of chattel slavery that are affected and others that are not, which is not true. And you can't take an example of an entertainer or a basketball player and say, well, he wasn't affected with that. That's not true, sir. And
I didn't mean to say that some of that group are or are not. And then,
no,
and
that's not necessarily so, sir. Just because they were able to slam, I'm sorry, because they were able to slam a basketball or sing, most of those people's grandfathers, fathers, and immediate mothers were affected by the conditions in their community that descend from chattel slavery. Just because they may have got rich from a talent don't mean that's just like you, sir. You may be educated, you may have money, but if someone hits you with a vehicle right now, that wouldn't mean the court of law is not going to say, I'm not going to pay you because you're doing pretty good. You were injured, therefore you are owed something due to that injury, regardless of your current situation. And I'll just leave that right there. Thank you, Sister Tamara.
Thank you, brother. Y'all, this has been, I know, Angela. I don't know. Richard, you and I went toe to toe on the campaign trail, and I knew that. Yeah, I knew I never got through to you, and I don't think that obviously, having this panel of guests, I'm not sure if they were able to get through to you. But I do want to give David and Robbie, and I want to thank my guests. I want to thank Be the Power for coming on, the brothers Logic and Grim and Ali. Thank you guys for coming on and being my guest today. Thank you, Angela, Nirvana, Reparations Perspective, for coming on and being my guest today. But let's give David and Robbie the final words. Robbie, you go first because I want David to close us out. Unmute your mic. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I thank you. Angela, thank you for bringing all the statistics. Be the Power, those folks were excellent in tying together personal stories and specifics regarding history to current relevant statistics. I'm baffled, Mr. Winfield. I'm baffled that you could hear from Angela's research, from advocacy components that are clearly sensical. From a legal standpoint, I looked you up. I understand you're a philosopher. I understand why you care in general, but I'm baffled why you're not making the connection for chattel slavery, people being considered property. And clearly, you went to Yale, you're an educated person, you're a professor, you teach people. So I don't know how you don't see the valid legal argument of punitory and compensatory damages and the ratification that the United States government basically did in multiple actions, and why that's relevant. As a philosopher, you would make the connection with history to people today. And the only thing that it's reminding me of is that you're saying, the classic all lives matter instead of really understanding Black Lives Matter. And I have to agree with the gentleman who pointed out the white moderate and how damaging and dangerous this is. You seem to be very comfortable telling people who have literally lived through and are descendants today of what has occurred, what they should have instead of what they're asking for. And that's odd. That's odd that someone is educated and who sits in a position of privilege teaching people that studied at Yale, who is a philosopher and knows history, would take the position on this show publicly and state, I'm a Bernie Sanders fan, but I make no confusion that what needs to be done for everyone is acceptable for who the descendants of slavery are today, and what needs to happen for that group of people that had a specific history that requires a specific damage. And frankly, if you really understand, economics, you'll understand that those monies that are owed, to your credit, you said they're owed, which is helpful, would go right back into the economy and would stimulate, quote unquote healing, right? Not only in an economic sense, but everyone's talking about healing today, yet we're not able to make the connection, even with someone like you who teaches for a living. So I would ask that you contemplate where your blockage is, that you're not able to separate these two conditions for everyone, and specifically Black people who were descendants of slavery. So I say that very respectfully in listening to everyone today. And I'm really confused as I am on the folks at the Capitol, because I don't know any of those people. So I don't understand where they're coming from. And really, I don't fully understand you. I don't know if something's happened in your background I don't know. You seem to not be able to make that connection, but you have the intellectual capacity to do it. So has something happened in your background?
Let's let David chime in. David. Unmute yourself. Yeah. I got you. Go ahead. We can hear you now.
Well, I heard a lot of talking past each other, and I don't think it's coming, from the Be the Power and Angela's side. I think they were trying to directly connect with what Richard Whitfield was saying, but there was this constant talking past. Richard Whitfield said, where does systemic racism lie? Where does the focus of it lie? And what I would say, based on my reading of Ted Allen, The Invention of the White Race, is that the focus of systemic racism is not simply the war, the whatever you want to call it, to be dramatic, genocidal war against African Americans. It is about creating a structural inequality between two strata of the working class. The whole purpose of white supremacy in the history of this country is to maintain social control over the working class by creating a systemic inequality between European American working people and African American, and I would say other working people of color. But that's an argument that I will leave for another day. You cannot get to a class-based resolution of the capital, of the power of capital, if you have one half of the working class fighting to protect the power of capital and the other half demanding clawbacks from it, because that half that's fighting to protect the power of capital are never going to be, are going to always be whatever, this whole thing about demographics, that, Black people or people of color are going to be 50% of the vote, and then that's going to solve it. It's not going to solve it, because the other 50% are going to be fighting a war against us. Okay. So unless there is a direct addressing of the issue of reparations to European American working class people, so that they are offered a choice at the very least, offered a choice between siding with capital and siding with their class brothers and sisters. Nobody has posed that choice, and certainly not Richard Whitfield. And the idea that I heard it over and over again, that these general social initiatives are going to solve the problem of inequality. And that just is not going to happen, because the white worker, that sociological phenomenon, that entity, is standing in the way. And if Black people want to have a revolution, I'll be there, but I'd like to be there with some other European Americans,
Well, it doesn't seem like, I don't think Richard is going to join you, David.
Well, I can't.
If there's a revolution, I don't think if you come over here and help us fight, I don't think Richard is going to join us.
I can't hear you. I can't hear what you're saying, Tamara. But
no worries.
Let me just close with in the 1880s, the robber barons were the big capitalists, railroads and steel and all of that other thing. Jay Gould was one of the great robber barons, and it's attributed to him. We don't know if he actually said it, but there was a quote from him that says, "I can hire one half of the working class to kill off the other half." Okay, that's social control, and that I think sums up what systemic racism is about.
No.
So racial privilege of European Americans that you were talking about, which is real, creates tremendous a chasm of segregation, of separate and unequal status, is not there to benefit working class whites. It's there to keep them under control and as deputies of the ruling class. And that's the solution that I see, and which Professor Whitfield, with all due respect, you do not address. This is what needs to be addressed, particularly by European American progressives. If you don't do that, you're doing nothing. Okay. Nothing.
Thank you, David. Let me mute everybody because I'm going to end with Richard and I. Richard, I want to thank you for being a guest on this broadcast. I respect you, and you ran alongside me in this race to the United States Senate. And I saw this was a part of your candidacy that you got wrong. And I brought you here today because I think I still have hope, Richard, that you're going to come along and you're going to get this. I think I still have hope for you. And I just want to say thank you for coming in today and having this conversation. Joe Biden is talking about unity. There will be no unity in this country, Richard. And hear me good, until we have reconciliation, reckoning, and reparation. This is another generation, and we're not going to sit back. We're not our ancestors. We're demanding it. It is a debt owed, and we're going to continue to fight. And we're going to fight harder and harder, Richard. And I'm hopeful that you're going to somehow maybe come back and watch this broadcast and hear, because we're not going away. And reparations is here. Reparations is old. Reparations is now, Richard. And I'll give you the final word.
I invite you all to consider what I have to say on why victims, but not descendants, deserve reparations, what reparations can achieve, and what the social rights agenda can achieve. I do this, by the way, on a podcast on reparations, which is one of the episodes of my podcast, America Unchained, which you can check out on the usual places for podcasts. So take a look. And if you want to look at the social rights agenda in a more detailed treatment, take a look at my latest book, Democracy Unchained. Yeah. It's available.
Richard, I want to say one thing. You keep saying victims and descendants as if we are different people. We are one and the same. You're looking at us. I bought a home before my mother. You looking at us, Richard. I remember the slave stories. I remember the outhouse. I remember my people picking tobacco. As a little girl, I saw this. You're looking at us, Richard. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this week's broadcast. I am Tamara Johnson-Shealy. You can find Miss Robbie Caban, everybody. You can find her at robbiecaban.com. You can find Mr. David Slavin at Acknowledge the Divide. You can find me at tamarashealy.com. Miss Angela Nirvana, tell us where to find you real quick on our way out. Unmute yourself real quick.
The Reparationist Perspective, every Friday and Sunday around 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 Central, and 8 Eastern. I have to factor it in around my advocacy, so that time may fluctuate, but standing Fridays and Sundays. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. Thank you all for the insight. It was great chopping it up with you.
Thank you. Have a great week, everybody. As we continue our series on Black History and Black History Month, we'll bring more and more and more of this kind of dialogue. See you guys next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care.